Hello, and welcome to Threads of Fate, a podcast all about astrology, divination, and the threads of fate that weave throughout all of our lives. My name is Kira Ryberg. I am your host, and today we are going to be looking at the astrology of January, the very first month of 2026. And we've got some big stuff coming up. So I'm really excited to go alignment by alignment and talk it all through with you so you can emerge on the other side feeling prepared, ready for what's to come, and maybe even a little excited too. So the month really begins astrologically on the first, which is not always the case, with Mercury entering Capricorn. And Mercury is going to be joining a stellium of planets in Capricorn, which means there's a couple different planets moving through that sign right now. It is going to be the Sun, Mars, and Venus all hanging out there, and Mercury is going to join the show. This is honestly a big turning point in terms of the astrology that we saw in December being really heavy and harsh and dealing with a lot of rejection and denial and difficult circumstances because all of those same planets that are now in Capricorn, the Sun, Venus, Mars, and now Mercury on the first, were squaring Saturn previously. There was this big feeling of getting kind of cast down, getting humbled, running into difficulty, delays, all of these things that we were trying to get moving just kept running up against a form of opposition. And now that is lifted for the final planet, which is Mercury. So we can all kind of rejoice a little bit that those squares are over. I know I certainly will be. Mercury in Capricorn in general is a bit more of a focused, direct kind of energy, very concerned with what is material and tangible, because that is what we are focused on in Capricorn. So when we have Mercury, the planet of communication and messages moving through this sign, we tend to communicate in a bit more of a direct fashion. I always think Saturn ruled signs kind of have a bit more of a sarcastic nature to them. There is a dryness there because Saturn is a very dry planet. So you can kind of expect communication to become a little bit drier, a little bit less emotional and enthusiastic and passionate, like we see in Sagittarius, and a little bit more attuned to kind of what's right in front of us, what's really kind of occupying our time and our attention, what's getting us motivated with Mars there. And also having some things to say about our values with Venus present as well. It's more of a straight shooter kind of energy, which can be appreciated, especially because Mercury is leaving the sign of their detriment, which is Sagittarius. Now, when a planet is in detriment, it means everything that that planet is responsible for, it kind of takes a hit a little bit. It feels a little less comfortable. It comes a little bit less easy. We have to work harder at it. And so for the last little while here, because Mercury actually stationed retrograde in Sagittarius months back, we've been doing this kind of back and forth thing that can create challenges in the ways that we are talking to one another. Travel, transportation, commerce, all of those things usually take a little bit of a hit when Mercury is in Sagittarius. They just feel harder to do. And now that Mercury is going to be moving into Capricorn on the first, that really gets lightened up a little bit. There's an ease now that comes in. Mercury doesn't have a ton of what we call dignity in Capricorn, but there's a couple degrees at the very beginning of the sign that Mercury actually rules over because they have a bound there. If you're unfamiliar with what the bounds are, I have a guidebook on them on my website that you can check out. Essentially, they are subdivisions of the zodiac signs. They get us a little bit more specific, a little bit more nuanced. They tell us what tools that a planet has to work with. So when Mercury enters Capricorn, they are immediately met with an environment where they're allowed to use their own tools. So all of those things that Mercury signifies that we just talked about, communication, transportation, travel, commerce, coin, all that good stuff, Mercury can use those things now in a way that helps them approach the Capricorn parts of our lives. So consider what your rising sign is and what house Capricorn falls in for you. And that is where you're going to see kind of a burst of mental energy. You're probably going to start thinking about that area of life a lot more. And you're also going to start communicating about those things both internally and externally with other people at this time. If you are someone who has Mercury activated right now in some way, shape, or form, so usually we're looking at something like timing techniques, like perfection years for this, then you are going to be getting a boost when Mercury leaves Sagittarius and enters their own bound, which means you should start feeling a little bit more resourced and a little bit more supported as we kind of shut the door on Mercury's detriment and open the door into Saturn's home sign of Capricorn. So, one thing that's really nice about Mercury coming in and joining the stellium of planets in Capricorn is it allows us to start talking about what's going on there, right? And Capricorn is a hot spot in January. We have a Venus cazimi and a Mars cazimi taking place there. We have a new moon there. We have a Mercury Mars conjunction. All eyes are on Capricorn this month. And now that Mercury is kind of coming into the fold on the first, this really allows us to start thinking about it, to rationalize about it, to approach these topics with a little bit more of a structured, logical kind of orientation that I think is going to feel really supportive to help understand and break down in the way that Mercury likes to do what is really being seated there, what realizations are coming to fruition, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a minute when we start discussing the cazimis. Because, like I said, there's a lot going on in Capricorn this month. It's a big one. So, after Mercury enters Capricorn on the 1st, we get a full moon in Cancer on the 13th. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. So, if you are watching the video version, you can see what the dynamic of this full moon is. It's intense. I'm not going to lie. In my notes, I just wrote, yikes, this is a wild one. And the reason for that is because the moon is, of course, opposing the sun in Capricorn. That's what happens whenever we get a full moon. It means the moon and the sun are opposing one another in the sky. But because the sun is hanging out so closely with Venus and Mars, Venus is at 12 degrees, the sun is at 13 degrees, and Mars is at 14 degrees. This means the moon is not only opposing the sun, but also Venus and Mars at the same time. Plus, we've got Mercury hanging out in Capricorn, and we've got Jupiter hanging out with the moon in Cancer. Let's break all of this down because it's a lot, right? So, one, this full moon is really going to cast a light on the part of our chart that Cancer is concerned with, right? So, if this is your first house, this is going to be an illumination around your life direction, around your sense of self, maybe your health, right? Second house would be things that bring you a sense of self support, your personal resources, your livelihood, finances, skill sets. Third house, siblings, transportation methods, right? And so on and so forth throughout all of the houses. So always, always, always take into consideration where this is happening for you, because that is going to help you get a lot more specific and nuanced about how these more general themes are actually going to play out and impact you in your life. So we're going to be shining a light on the part of our chart that Cancer is concerned with. Now, Cancer is the moon sign, right? So the moon is very happy to be in Cancer. She's very comfortable here, right? And she is concerned with nourishment, with safety, with security, with maintaining homeostasis, with tending to the body, right? There's a lot of these themes of kind of prioritizing our internal and our emotional worlds in order and in service to our bodies and our relationship with the external material world. That happens whenever the moon kind of moves through Cancer. But when the sun is in Capricorn, there is this greater focus on materiality, on security, and there's kind of these ways in which these two themes are talking to each other, right? Where Cancer is very mushy gushy, very emotional, very sensitive. Capricorn is very dry, very rational, right? And so we are feeling a tension between these things and a call to try to make peace with those two parts of our lives, right? How do we prioritize security and comfort? How do we prioritize a rational, logical approach that also holds space for our emotions and the things that we're feeling at this time as it relates to that axis in our charts, right? So, the thing that makes this full moon kind of pokey and a little less comfortable than we tend to see when we have the full moon in Cancer is that Mars is very, very close to the sun, like I said before, which means right after the full moon goes exact at 13 degrees, the moon moves straight into an opposition with Mars. Now, this can really heighten tension. It can create conflict. There can be more of a tendency towards having aggressive or abrupt responses to things. This can be an inflammation of your internal world, right? Of your emotions. Like this looks like kind of getting in a fight with someone a little bit as it relates to the topics that are getting activated for you personally, and feeling that really powerfully in your body and feeling really emotionally dysregulated in a way. Now, it doesn't stay like that. that's the good news, is that there's going to be kind of this illumination that happens when the full moon goes exact, and then something that creates conflict or tension or a disturbance after we are brought into a greater awareness of what is going on there, that then brings us to force some type of, face some type of conflict or face some type of difficulty, and after the moon moves on from the opposition to Mars, it's like she heads straight into this conjunction with Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is a very positive planet, very nurturing and nourishing in Cancer in particular. Jupiter is what we call the exaltation lord of Cancer. So the moon and Jupiter have a lot to say about this sign, and they both do very, very well there. So after this moment of like this eruption of tension and conflict and discomfort that the moon faces in the opposition to Mars, she moves into this very gentle, warm, sweet embrace with Jupiter, which is going to feel probably like there was a big blow up. And then immediately after, or a short time after, there is an opportunity for repair. For a salve to come in and kind of, take care of the wound that was exposed during the opposition with Mars. Feels almost like there's like generative conflict, and then you push through where you recognize the tension and the pressure that that opposition is speaking to, and then you're met with a safety net on the other side. It's like, congrats, you did the hard thing, you faced the uncomfortable truth, and now here's your reward sort of energy. So even though this kind of full moon looks destabilizing in some ways, especially during that opposition with Mars, there is something really supportive that we find through facing those difficulties. And another thing to note is that technically at this time, Venus is going to be within 1 degree of the sun. Now, whenever a planet gets within 1 degree of the sun, they are said to be cazimi. And cazimi essentially means that the planet is now protected from the harsh rays of the sun and is now illuminated. Everything that they represent is being protected, fortified, purified, renewed in a way that tends to bring a lot of clarity around whatever that planet signifies. So, Venus, the planet of love and relationships and values and devotion, desire, pleasure, creativity, right, is now in the heart of the sun, is protected, is illuminated. And that's happening in tandem with this full moon and the opposition that the moon faces with Mars. So it's almost like there's a massive light being shown on the Cancer Capricorn axis in our chart that is bringing awareness and realizations around what we need to feel safe and comfortable, that is attached to our relationships to other people, that is attached to the things that we really desire and that we want and that we crave and that we yearn for. This feels like a revelation around what it is that you truly want. And then potentially acknowledging the ways that that might not always jive with other people, right? Like this kind of feels like, oh, I actually realized that I really want to maybe, do this thing with this person. So you bring it up and it's kind of something that's pokey and uncomfortable. And then there's this moment of conflict, right? There's this moment of tension that happens when the moon opposes Mars. And then because you're able to talk it out, because Mercury is hanging out with all those planets in Capricorn, then you're met with a moment of reprieve and acknowledgement and support when the moon conjoins Jupiter. So all of these things are kind of happening very, very shortly after one another. So there is this recognition of desire of what you are yearning for and what you are craving in the Capricorn part of your chart that is then pinged by the moon moving through Cancer and opposing the sun, that then creates some type of difficulty or emotional discomfort or dysregulation when the moon opposes Mars, that is then resolved shortly after when the moon conjoins Jupiter. Now, when we think about the decans that this happens in, right, I always love to do that for the new and full moons because I think it gives us a much deeper kind of story to dig into there. And, the second decan of Cancer, where the moon is going to be during this full moon, is one that is very concerned with keeping things safe, keeping things behind closed doors to nurture them and nourish them and care for them so that they can thrive on their own, right? It is like, how do we get this thing to the best possible level that it can be by protecting it from outside forces, from external opinions. If you want to know more about this decan, I did an entire episode on it with Chloe Margarita. We have a whole hour plus on Cancer too. So go check that episode out if you haven't already, once you're done listening to this. And that tendency to protect, to keep safe, right, is being challenged by these planets that are all moving through the second decan of Capricorn, which is one that is very, very ambitious. And this ambitious kind of energy usually leads someone to realize that while they want to shoulder the brunt of the burden and the toil and the effort for whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish all on their own, that they actually need to ask for help. This is a very collaborative decan. And so when we think about the moon trying to keep something safe, but the sun and Venus and Mars, the decan that they're all in is a Venus Mars decan as well. So we have both rulers of that decan present, which is just adds a whole nother interesting layer to things, right? It kind of feels like there's this realization that the lofty dreams that we have in Capricorn are best accomplished with other people, but this creates a tension because you want to keep something safe and secure, and you don't necessarily want to share it quite yet because you want it to grow and prosper behind closed doors. But how can you keep something behind closed doors if you're not sharing it with other person so that they can add their touch, so that they can collaborate with you, so they can bring the dream to fruition? Right? So there's a little bit of a tension there when we think about the decans. But the moon is also conjunct this fixed star Sirius, which is very ambitious as well and can kind of create this larger than life feeling, right? Sirius is the brightest star in the sky, is a marker of abundance. And I think that there is this call here to envision a life where you have more support in place, where you are truly comfortable, where you can relax, right? And these planets in Capricorn are trying to make you realize how you can get there, what dreams you need to be seeding, what actions you need to be taking, what passions you need to be pursuing. And there's some discomfort between where we are and where we want to be, and how we want to do it alone, and how we actually need to let others in on the process to support us. So again, think about which axis this activates for you. It's going to be a pretty intense one, but there is a lot of support that we find right after the full moon goes exact and the moon passes that opposition with Mars. Just a couple hours later, the moon is going to conjoin Jupiter at 20 degrees of Cancer in the final decade of Cancer, which the moon and Jupiter co-rule, which is a place of abundance and nourishment and support. I literally call it a wellspring of support. So in a way, it's almost like we find a reward for some of the tension and the conflict and the discomfort that we faced earlier when the moon was in a less supportive place, opposing Mars in particular. And all of this is kind of ignited by Venus entering the heart of the sun and our desires becoming a little bit clearer to us during that time. All right. So now when we move ahead a little bit in the month, we get to these cazimis that I was talking about. Venus is already kind of cazimi on the third. She's within 1 degree, but her and Mars do a dual cazimi where they're both within 1 degree of the sun for several days. From January 6th to January 10th, they're both going to be cazimi. They're both traveling very, very close to the sun. Now, this is significant because it doesn't happen all the time. Venus cazimi is pretty regular. Mars cazimi is once every 2 years, right? Or sorry, twice a year. And so there is this tendency to, you know, really think like, oh, academia is going to be the thing that changes my life, but they're pretty common. But getting two at the same time is not, right? So this does actually mark this particular moment from January 6th to January 10th as rather significant, especially for anybody who has mid-degree cardinal placements. If you've got placements in that second decan of any of the cardinal signs, Capricorn, Cancer, Libra, or Aries, you are going to be getting lit up by this. If you are in a Venus perfection year, if you are in a Mars perfection year, if you are in a Sun Leo perfection year, right? All of us, in a way, I think are going to be feeling this in some form or another because so many people are getting impacted by this. And the thing that I really like about them both going cazimi at the same time, both of them entering the heart of the sun, is that it's not just our values and our desires that are being put on center stage and asking us to kind of make peace with them and to recognize them. But there's also something there that says, like, now let's get shit done with Mars, right? It's not just the recognition, but there's also an ability to take action around these things, which I think is a really beautiful thing to see. There's something that's really supportive around going after what we want at this time. And I always think of Venus, Mars, and the sun as kind of a triad, right? This is a marker of becoming known for your passions, for fighting for your values, for shining a light on conflict in relationships, which is not always a bad thing, right? Conflicts are a part of any long term relationship. And sometimes we need to have uncomfortable conversations. We need to talk about the stuff that's bothering us so that we can reach a place of greater relational harmony, which is what Venus is striving for. So having all of them together can be a time of acknowledging discomfort or things that feel pokey or things that are going to piss someone off in order to actually restabilize the relationship and the connection and move into a place of greater awareness and understanding for everybody involved. I also think it's one of those combinations that can help you realize what needs to be severed. Mars likes to cut, Mars likes to take away, right? And so, because of that, the sun is really attempting to do this in an authentic fashion, right? It's not just cutting someone or something or some habit off for the sake of it. It's doing it because you don't want to be known for that thing, because it doesn't inspire you anymore, or because it is preventing you from living an authentic life, and because it does not align with your values, because it does no longer feel good for you, which is the Venus component of these things. Now, when I say this, I think it's very common to jump to the most dramatic, interpretation of this, which is like, oh no, like my relationship's going to end and Mars is going to come in and sever my connection. And while that certainly probably will be the case for a lot of people, it's definitely not the most common way that this plays out, right? This can be about having a change in your music taste. This can be the end of a certain kind of food, or the realization that maybe you want to start taking public transportation to work instead of driving your car, right? If it's like that would be a third house kind of cazimi, dual cazimi moment, right? It can be the recognition that your current living arrangement or roommates are not supportive for your growth or don't feel aligned with you anymore, and that you actually want to strike out on your own and be alone, right? It could be the realization that a certain hobby in the fifth house is just not really feeling good for you anymore. It's like, oh, I really enjoyed doing that when I first started, but there's something about it that is not joyful to me anymore. And then cutting it off and dedicating yourself to whatever does become revealed at this time around the nature of your desires and what brings you a sense of pleasure and inspiration. So, I'm actually excited for this double cazimi. It does not happen in a nice house for me personally, but I'm still really looking forward to it, especially for a lot of the people in my life who have Capricorn placements. I think it's going to be a very clarifying moment. I think that this is both an illumination of certain things that we need to look at that we oftentimes don't look at. And it's initiation. It's asking us to step up to the plate. It's asking us to do something with this, right? Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Mars is able to put the pedal to the metal and make things work. And all of this is being ruled by Saturn, who's at the final degrees of Pisces, where there is an emotional undercurrent, where there is this kind of mythic, larger than life quality. And it really feels like asking us, are these passions or these relationships or these hobbies, this living environment, whatever it is, right? Is this really what is worth living for? Is this worth the emotional labor? Is this worth the weight of grief? Is this worth all of those different things that Saturn has been trying to put structure and awareness around in Pisces? So, big one, to say the least. Not exactly a chill moment, but one that I think is actually going to be really clarifying in a way that I think is supportive for many of us. Now, the thing about these double cazimis is that they do occur in a very tight opposition with Jupiter, which adds another layer to this, right? Early January, they especially all go, they're all at the same degree around 18, 20, 17 degrees of cardinal signs, and Jupiter is at 20 degrees of Cancer. So there's a really tight opposition happening here. And when you read some of the ancient astrological texts, especially someone like Firmicus Maternus, loves a Mars Jupiter situation, is always talking about how these planets are actually really supportive for one another. And I think of Mars and Jupiter as kind of Kool-Aid Man energy, right? Love to egg each other on. Mars is like, let's get shit done. And Jupiter's like, yeah, yeah, you got this. It's very energizing and excitable and encouraging for the things that Mars wants to go after and make happen, right? It's oftentimes a marker of like a benevolent leader or commander, right? It is someone who is not shying away from opportunities to be in charge, to be seen, to make things happen. And Jupiter adds a little bit of this benefic quality. But now Jupiter is in opposition, which means there's kind of a teeter-totter thing going on, right? Jupiter's exalted, Mars is exalted, right? Mars is also in the decan. He co-rules alongside Venus, with Venus there and the sun. So the Capricorn part of the chart is weighing a little heavier, right? Kind of, I hesitate to say winning out a little bit, but there's a little bit of that there, and I think that because of this, Jupiter is really pulling us back to ask, where does this sit in our emotional interior, right? Does it feel safe? Does it elevate you? Does it resource you? Does it nourish you? And the planets like Capricorn are kind of like, I don't know, it's the dream though. Like this, I know now that this is what I want to go after. And Jupiter's kind of checking it a little bit, tempering the maybe impulsivity of Mars, which is, to be fair, a little bit more tempered in Capricorn already. But I think Jupiter is trying to give us a little bit more of that big picture. And the big picture is not necessarily aligning or creating harmony with those planets that are very focused on the realizations that are coming through in Capricorn at this time. And that causes a little bit of discomfort there. But I actually think that Jupiter is playing more of a supportive role than we might anticipate during this time. Um, Another thing that can come about as a result of this kind of double cazimi is a potential for new collaborations to emerge, depending on what house Capricorn applies for you, if this is a social house in particular, right? The third, the seventh, the 11th, and I would even throw in the eighth for the collaboration element of things. You know, you might find that there is an opportunity to connect with another person who wants to help bring your dream to fruition. Don't be afraid to ask for help, to hire someone if you have the means or the resources to do so, or to bring someone into the fold. That will make this easier and that will help Jupiter kind of temper the situation a little bit, right? Because we have additional perspectives being brought in that can help us go forth and accomplish and achieve the dreams that are being seeded and the initiations that are taking place in Capricorn at this time. So, a lot going on, right? It's a lot. Excuse me. All right. So, January 10th, we get the official Mars Jupiter opposition. So it's already kind of been building up, but it goes exact on the 10th. And, I kind of mentioned already, but this can create a tension between the action that Mars wants to be taking and the more reflective quality that Jupiter has in Cancer, right? Doing what is smart versus doing what is practical and effective, right? Jupiter's like, let's prioritize wisdom and if it feels good in our body. And Mars is like, I kind of just want to go forth and get the thing done and put the pedal to the metal and accomplish the goals that I have right now because they feel so pressing. They feel so important, right? And so them being at odds, it just kind of creates a tension point between the passion and the enthusiasm that they have as a pair, where now they're at war with one another, and that passion is actually creating more problems than it is creating support. So it's a little bit of a thing where they both want to get their way because they're both exalted and they both kind of expect to get their way. That's the thing about exalted planets is they have very high expectations, right? They they feel like they're checking in at the five-star hotel resort and that they're going to get every single thing handed to them. So they don't really like to run into circumstances where they're being challenged, right? So Jupiter is doing that to Mars, Mars is doing that to Jupiter. So you can expect a little bit of a push and pull on the Cancer and Capricorn axis of your chart at this time on January 10th when that opposition goes exact, but it's all on the heels of that double cazimi as well. So don't forget that it's informed by the full moon in Cancer that happens before the cazimi with Venus, the cazimi with Mars. It's like they're not isolated incidents, right? They're all building on one another to tell a greater story of um of beginnings that is really taking place in Capricorn this month. I told you guys at the start here, Capricorn is the star of the show this month, and it is very true. But in addition to Capricorn being the star of the show, Aquarius is also going to have a spotlight cast upon them because all of these planets that are moving through Capricorn are going to enter Aquarius and start lighting up that sign. So on January 17th, Venus is going to enter Aquarius, which really shifts the pace away from that very dry, cold kind of relational quality that we find in Capricorn and more into this sanguine environment that we find in Aquarius. It's a little bit more moist, it's a little bit more warm, it's a little bit more connective, a little bit more humanitarian oriented. Um, a bit less rigid in a lot of ways, but there's also, I don't know, I feel like Venus in Capricorn is very focused on like this kind of sacred connection to land, the responsibility of love and devotion to one another, to the world that we live in, right? And in Aquarius, it's a little bit more of an idealistic energy that Venus is taking on. I also think of Venus and Aquarius as just kind of being like the person that loves the weirdos is often like a Venus and Aquarius kind of individual, right? It is a love of what is not necessarily socially accepted as much. It is Venus in Aquarius, right? This is Saturn's sign, and Saturn is the exile. Saturn is on the fringes. And so when Venus is in Aquarius, she has a love of that stuff. She has a love for what is ancient and old and weird and different and, things that just don't fit our status quo or usual expectation of what we might anticipate Venus is going to be attracted to, right? So this can kind of turn our attractions on their head and have us fall more and more in love with uniqueness rather than sameness. So there's a greater likelihood at this time of kind of staying on the fringes yourself as well and admiring people, crafts, opportunities from afar rather than getting up close and personal. I think there's the Saturnian nature in Aquarius that still creates a distancing effect, right? Kind of like an admirer sort of energy. But then there is still that connective thing where it's like, oh, I really want to be in love, but I'm kind of a wallflower. Like there's this push and pull between distance and proximity, right? The desire to connect and to create and to love, and also something that keeps you away or at arm's length a little bit there. Now, in Aquarius, we don't tend to think of this as a sign that Venus does super well in, but actually she does pretty okay. In Aquarius, she has the bound here. She also co-rules 2 decans of the sign, so 20 degrees of the sign. Venus is pretty happy in, and even in that second decan that she doesn't rule over, she has a couple degrees by bound. So the majority, I think 23, 24 degrees of the sign, Venus feels pretty comfortable out of 30, right? So she's doing pretty good here. And in a lot of ways, I think Venus in Aquarius is very crafty, very inclined towards making things beautiful out of nothing or out of limited resources or out of trash or out of things that other people have discarded or don't think are as shiny or important. And so, using this opportunity to get a little bit crafty yourself, to find ways to fall in love with and to admire and to appreciate what is not typically seen as beautiful, right? There's kind of like a love of what's quirky and weird, going on here. And I think this transit is always an invitation to explore beauty in unexpected ways and to find ways to appreciate the treasure amidst the trash. So that is going to be a little bit on the Venus in Aquarius transit. Now, in terms of how this is going to impact you on a personal level, you're going to want to think about what part of your chart Aquarius occupies, right? Is this your 10th house of career, your 11th house of friendship and community and sharing your work with the world? Is it the 12th house where we find mental health and rest, right? Because there is going to be a boost there. There is going to be some additional support that Venus is bringing to the table, which is going to soften your relationship to this part of the chart and make it feel a little bit sweeter, a little bit more enjoyable, especially before Mars joins the party, which Mars will maybe unfortunately for some of us join the party later on, but this is a little bit more of like a sweeter entry into all of the Aquarius transits that we are going to see play out through the month. So that starts on January 17th. Now, January 18th, Mercury is going to conjoin Mars at 26 degrees of Capricorn. And on that very same day, we have a new moon at 28 degrees of Capricorn, which means Mercury and Mars are going to be meeting up and having a little bit of a rendezvous at the same time that the moon and the sun are doing the same thing, and they're all kind of hanging out together. Now, as they're all hanging out together, that means they're all influencing one another, right? We don't get one of these without the other. Going to go ahead and bring this up so you guys can see what I'm talking about for those watching the video version on YouTube. Here we go. So you can see that the moon and the sun are at 28 degrees of Capricorn, and Mercury and Mars are at 26 degrees of Capricorn as well. So this is the final Mercury Mars conjunction that we're getting for a while. We had one in Scorpio, we had one in Sagittarius when Mercury was stationing retrograde, and now we have a final one in Capricorn. And so we're seeing an end of their relationship with one another, which can create a little bit more of a divisive way of communicating. You know, Mercury is more likely to debate, to argue, to challenge, to be direct in the ways that they are communicating, storytelling, and thinking, even, right? There's a sharpness, there's an edge that Mars brings to the table. And especially in Capricorn, it becomes very strategic, right? So there can be, this is kind of good for like strategy planning. Especially depending on where like Capricorn is placed in your chart, right? There's a little bit more of like this, let's get our budget and our goals in order for 2026. And we're going to go through line by line and look at all of the things that feel kind of hard, but they're very materially oriented, right? Like Capricorn is a sign that is associated with what's material, right? So our finances, our bills, like all of the things that we have to do, the day in and day out tasks and things that it takes to be a human. And this is all happening in that final decan of Capricorn that is very concerned with material security and has a little bit of a scarcity mindset kind of around it, right? It wants to protect, it wants to hunker down, it wants to feel supported. It often does that by trying to kind of take all of the resources and keep them very close to your chest, right? This is the Four of Coins or the Four of Pentacles in tarot, and it's literally a guy kind of holding a coin very, very closely to his chest, even though there's a couple other ones that show that there is a point of stability and resourcedness that we find here. There's still that tendency of like, what if I lose it all though? So there can be some fear. I think especially some internal fear, right? Anxiety, stress that shows up around this time as it relates to resources and as it relates to the Capricorn part of your chart. But there is also a new beginning happening there too because of the new moon. So in a lot of ways, it's like this new moon is taking everything that the sun learned from its conjunction with Venus, its conjunction with Mars, and it's bringing it here and saying, okay, now we really need to turn a page in this part of our charts, in this area of our lives, right? And starting to think about the ways that you can structure and plan and orient yourself towards making that stuff a real possibility. The one thing I will say is that you might want to be a little mindful of how you're communicating during this time because Mercury Mars stuff, it's more prone to interrupt, it's more prone to argue and debate, like I was saying, but it's also more prone to say something kind of cutting. This is the words are weapons alignment, right? And that can create an increase in verbal altercations. And because we are having a new moon at the same time, you don't maybe want the new beginning to be coming out of a place of saying something that you regret, right? So just being very intentional, thinking before you speak. Luckily, Capricorn is good at doing that, Mercury and Capricorn. But when Mars is there, it adds a bit of an impulsive kind of nature to things that can have us, yeah, thinking, a little bit less and speaking a little bit more directly in a way that is not always going to land well with the person on the receiving end of that. So there's very much a turning of a page in the Capricorn part of our charts right now that happens on the heels of those Venus and Mars cazimis and now this new moon, which is kind of like a greater realization and illumination that happens during the dual cazimi about these subjects, about whatever part of your chart the Capricorn occupies, that brings you to a place of having these difficult conversations and maybe saying some things that piss some people off so you can get to a place of greater openness and awareness, to begin something new, to truly change the way that you are approaching the Capricorn part of your chart, right? So this new moon is kind of jam-packed with a lot of intensity, and it's all still ruled by the Saturn Neptune conjunction. So there's going to be some fogginess or some haziness in light of the clarity that the cazimis have brought as well, right? And Neptune can kind of have this idealistic tendency towards it, where it's like a dreamy, hopeful, fantasy, enchanted kind of energy that is blurring our notion of what is real and tangible, right? And so it's almost like you're getting something very clearly coming to you, and there's a greater awareness of how you need to move through, but there's not necessarily an ability to see exactly how to make that happen from point A to point B. And that's okay. You know, new moons are not times of maximum light. There are times where the moon is not visible in the sky. So you're not necessarily supposed to have all the answers. You're seeding something. You're not, it's not the day that you bear the fruit, you know. So if you don't exactly know how to continue forward, this is just the moment where you start something, where you initiate something, where you begin to change a mindset, where you have a difficult conversation that's kind of brings you to a place where you're like, okay, no, we're in a different place now. I don't exactly know how we're going to get to the end result that I want, but we need to start taking steps forward, right? And Mars in Capricorn is very good at putting one foot in front of the other to just get things done and craft and cultivate the legacy that Saturn is concerned with, right? So just one foot in front of the other at this time. Something that I will say is that whenever we have new moon in Capricorn or in Scorpio, you know, those are signs where the moon doesn't fare too well. And the moon is our emotional body and our physical body, right? So there can be a tendency to overthink during this time with the conjunction to Mercury and Mars that creates physical tension, right? And can leave us feeling a little bit more exhausted, a little bit more worn down, a little bit more depleted, right? I think of Moon, Mars, especially when the moon doesn't have dignity, contacts, especially when Mercury is involved, just kind of holding tension in your body, right? Like your shoulders kind of getting really tense, your jaw locking up, and realizing that you are physically holding a lot of stress, right? And one of the best things that you can do is try to move that stress through the body. Go for a walk, right? Go scream into a pillow. You know, do something that allows the energy to not stagnate, and that can be really supportive for working through some of those less than pleasant physical symptoms that come up at this time. And if you're not someone who is capable of moving around as much, then, you know, some breath work can be really supportive for this, some meditation, right? Just allowing that Mars, Mercury stuff to not manifest as having a lot of really unpleasant thoughts that you can't necessarily get a hold on, right? This can be a little bit more of like an anxiety inducing transit. And if you're someone who suffers from anxiety, you know, being aware of that can be helpful, right? To know that this is a day where that tendency might be a little bit more active. So try to ground down, try to root down into something and employ whatever tools that you have in your toolkit to navigate that as best you can. And because all of this is happening in a very dry earth sign, right? Make sure you hydrate. There's like a big call to say, like, you are probably going to feel a little inflamed, a little dried out. And so, something as simple as just making sure you're drinking your water this day, maybe take a nice bath, right? Do something supportive for your physical body and for your emotional body. That's your homework for this new moon, if you can. All right, January 20th. Sun and Mercury are going to enter Aquarius, and Venus is going to conjoin Pluto at 3 degrees. So, another big day. January is kind of like that. We get a lot of these things happening all at the same time, right? Now, the sun moving into Aquarius is significant because the sun does not like to be in Aquarius, right? Is the worst. The sun finds its detriment, which basically means that the sun is as far away from home as he can possibly be. So he naturally feels very uncomfortable in that sign. Now, because of that, our confidence, our self-worth, our belief in ourselves takes a little bit of a hit oftentimes when the sun moves through Aquarius, which makes sense, right? This is the winter season. We don't want to be out there and visible and performing and doing all that. We want to be cuddled in bed, cozy, right? Especially if you're at least in the northern hemisphere where we're experiencing winter. There's a little bit less of a call to kind of go out into the world and to be that center star. And the sun is a little bit more of a recluse, of a hermit, and this is going to amplify that tendency and can create a little bit of discomfort with putting yourself out there, speaking your mind, that kind of stuff. But it is also the start of Aquarius season. And as an Aquarius, I am always excited for Aquarius season. It's always a good time in my book, at least most of it. And because we get Mercury entering Aquarius on the same day, you might be able to guess that we are also going to get a Mercury cazimi shortly thereafter, the following day on January 21st. Now, we're going to have Venus, the Sun, and Mercury all in Aquarius with Pluto. And then Mars is going to join the party in a couple of days as well. So this really amplifies our focus on Aquarius, right? It's like we were putting so much time and energy and attention and thought into the Capricorn part of our chart. And now we are doing a very similar thing with the Aquarius part of our chart, right? We are starting to think about how this area of life informs our sense of self, how it contributes to our self-awareness, to our self-worth. And we are starting to think about how we want to orient ourselves around these topics and this area of life throughout the year, throughout 2026, right? So there's a little bit more of a detached, logical, rational approach to things with Mercury and Aquarius. One of my favorite things that this ancient astrologer Porphyry says is that when a sign does not have an exaltation lord, that their triplicity lord, the co-ruler, becomes a co-ruler of the sign, which is basically just technical jargon for saying that Mercury is one of the rulers of Aquarius alongside Saturn, which kind of goes in line with the modern idea that Aquarius is the exaltation of Mercury. We actually do have some traditional precedents for that kind of thought process. Not that Mercury is exalted there, but Mercury is kind of a co-ruler according to Porphyry, and I think that's definitely true. Mercury fares very well in Aquarius. Mercury likes to be there. Mercury rules abound. Mercury has rulership over the second decade entirely to themselves, the triplicity lord here, right? So all of the things that Mercury signifies, writing and communication, commerce, travel, transportation, right? All of those things get a boost when Mercury moves into Aquarius. It should feel a little bit easier to have conversations with people, to connect with others through storytelling, through all of the things that Mercury signifies. And it is going to turn our thought processes towards that part of our chart and allow us to take on a little bit more of a logical, rational approach to our entire lives, really, for a little bit of time, but especially the Aquarius part of our chart. Now, there's still that kind of idealistic energy that we find in Aquarius. It's often thinking about all of the things that we constructed and build in Capricorn and how do we make those better in Aquarius, right? There's that kind of I've thought about things a lot and I know how to make the world better because I've taken the time to really consider the best ways that everything functions together. And that's going to be a little bit of the energy that we get with all of these planets starting to move through Aquarius. Now, Venus, on this same day that the Sun and Mercury decide to just light up this part of our chart, conjoins Pluto. And Venus Pluto conjunctions can be a little bit intense, right? Pluto is the god of the dead and the underworld, right? And Venus is the planet of love and relationships and desire, as we've been talking about. So their conjunction often really brings us into a deeper awareness of the underbelly of relationships, into the power dynamics that inform our creative processes, inform our ability to connect with other, inform what we find pleasurable and enjoyable and happy. And so there can be a little bit more of an intensity there. I think Venus, Pluto stuff can often bring up kind of this spirit of jealousy, right? Pluto wants to control things. And when Pluto and Venus are together, there can be this desire to control relationships, right? To have control over this thing that is naturally uncontrollable because it involves other people, right? And there can also be a little bit of a reckoning with wanting things that are taboo, that are not accepted by society or by yourself or by your parents or your friends, and realizing that that might still be a desire that you hold and that you have to make peace with that part of yourself who maybe wants something that feels a little bit different, right? And Venus in Aquarius tends to want things that are different anyway. And now Pluto is saying you're going to come up against some structures and systems that are going to challenge that in a way that doesn't necessarily feel super comfortable, that pulls you into that underbelly, like I was talking about, right? This can reveal certain power dynamics and relationships that we don't always want to look at. This can create kind of like we're going into hell together moment between you and a friend or a partner or a lover, right? This can be a shedding of the muck that just can't go with you into the future. Pluto has this quality of constantly kind of like this death rebirth thing, right? Something's got to die so it can be reborn. We have to go through the process of scraping the mud and the muck and the underworld goo off of us so that we can be reborn again. And, a little bit of an awareness of things that are taboo. Jealousy, creative frenzy is another kind of key word that I like for Venus Pluto stuff, like this obsession taking over where it's like, I have to create now. I need to go make the thing. I need to go devote myself to this process and give myself over to it. So that can be another way that the Venus Pluto stuff plays out. But there is going to be a big light cast upon whatever is happening with the Venus Pluto conjunction because the sun is there as well. And Venus means is going to be combust at this time. So some of these principles and properties that the Venus Pluto conjunction is showing up as are not going to be as readily visible on the surface because the sun is there. So it can be more of an inkling of a feeling, a deeper awareness that is not necessarily clear, right? A probing or kind of a push to go investigate something further when it comes to your desires, when it comes to pleasure, when it comes to relationships or creative projects. But you might not get the full clarity that you're seeking until Venus gets a little bit further away from the sun. Now, on the 21st, we have that Mercury cazimi, kind of like I mentioned before, which is a little bit more of a clarity around how you want to approach the Aquarius parts of your life and a part of your chart, right? Can bring a little bit more of a rational, kind of logical bent towards things, like I was saying before. So it's a good time to just ask yourself, what are you thinking, learning, reasoning about? And this cazimi helps you realize what you want to devote yourself to as it relates to the Aquarius part of your chart. Now, Mercury cazimis are pretty common, right? We get a couple a year, so this isn't probably going to change your life or your world in any major way, but I do think it's one of the sweet spots of January. It's one of my favorite days of the month. So you can kind of note it as a day to have, maybe more important conversations, to launch something, it's kind of supportive for a lot of those things. Now, on January 23rd, Mars is going to enter Aquarius on the same day that the Sun conjoins Pluto. So, this really intensifies the narrative that is unraveling in this part of our charts, right? Mars is going to bring some tension, some discomfort, some action, energy, passion, conflict into the Aquarius parts of our chart, while the Sun conjoins Pluto and brings to light some of those power dynamics that were being unraveled when Venus conjoined Pluto earlier on the 20th. There is a little bit more of a potential for conflict to emerge and for difficult circumstances to happen around this time. So, kind of take care and think about what part of your life Aquarius is associated with, because there could be some tension that erupts there, right? Mars is adding heat. Mars is inflaming this part of our chart now, right? This is going to be harder for people who have day charts because Mars is going to be your most difficult planet. So Mars is kind of adding fuel to the fire that the Sun Pluto conjunction is bringing up. And Sun Pluto conjunctions can reveal taboos, can reveal those power dynamics, can reveal abuses of power in particular, right? Maybe a more generous or supportive kind of interpretation would be that the sun conjoining Pluto feels like deep self work, right? Integrating your soul and your self concept, or sorry, interrogating your soul and your self concept in order to really understand who you truly are at your core, all of the parts of yourself, not just the pretty ones that you want to share with others, but the deep ones, the disgusting ones, right? The things you're not proud of, and really looking at that stuff in a very real way, right? And not shying away from it. And coming off the heels of that Venus-Pluto conjunction, it's kind of like, well, you had to go there with another. Now, what did it teach you about yourself? And how do you integrate this information? And how does that bring up a capacity or a call to change something now that Mars is there too, right? What do you want to devote yourself to? What do you want to put your time, your energy, your labor, and your effort into so that you can make peace with everything that's arisen throughout January? Said it's an intense month. It's not the chillest one. We got a lot going on in January, really kicking it off with a bang. And honestly, 2026 as a whole, I'm calling it the year that changed everything. And it's because there's so many massive transits that happen this year that feels like we really are stepping into a new world, both personally and collectively. And one of the biggest reasons for that is because Neptune is going to be entering Aries, right? Kicking off a new, I think, 14-year transit right through this sign. We got a little dose of Neptune in Aries in 2025, but this is when we are in it for good, and it happens on January 26th. Now, we talked about this a lot in the year ahead forecast. So, if you haven't watched the year ahead forecast that I did for 2026 with Chloe Margarita, go check that out because we talk so much about Neptune entering Aries, the relationship between Neptune and Saturn in Aries, and kind of what it all means. But as a quick kind of breakdown, you know, Neptune is that product of idealization, of glamorization, of the ideal, the dream, the fantasy. And so we've seen Neptune in Pisces really be this fantasy around being hyper connected to one another, right? No boundaries, right? Pisces isn't a sign that does very good with boundaries. And during this, we saw the proliferation of social media, always being able to contact another person, right? Like our ability to connect and to relate to one another kind of took on this hyper fanatic approach almost. And we also saw, the glamorization of like the mystic and the sage, and astrology got so much more popular in the greater world, right? During this transit, we saw influencers become a thing, right? There's just a glamorization of what is beautiful, what is mystical that we saw with Neptune and Pisces. And now that Neptune is moving into Aries, we're going to see that same type of glamorization happening towards martial themes, which I'm not super excited about, right? But this can be like an idealization of, being really fit or war or violence or glorifying those types of things that really prioritize the individual, the one over the many, this is almost like every man for himself and being like, yeah, that's good, this is like pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of energy, and thinking that that's like a morally superior stance or perspective to hold. It's going to be an interesting one. And I often think with these outer planet transits, right, the ones that move so slowly, we often see, yes, a greater awareness of what the transit is going to be when it first kicks off. But sometimes it takes a little longer for us to notice what's going on, right? Because most of what we start to feel is not the presence of Neptune and Aries, for example, but the absence of Neptune and Pisces, right? This fog, this confusion, this delusion, this enchantment that we have been experiencing since 2011, I want to say, with Neptune and Pisces is gone now for good, right? So there should be more of this clarity that has just not been there. You could imagine almost like you've been walking through a foggy forest in Pisces for 14 years. And all of a sudden now that's cleared. And you're able to really see where you're going for the first time. You're able to pick up the pieces. There's not this rose colored glasses approach towards Pisces anymore because those have been, moved over into Aries. And the absence might feel louder at the start than the presence of Neptune and Aries. But like I said, we talk a lot about that transit in the year ahead forecast. So go ahead and make sure you check that one out for all of the tea on Neptune and Aries. Now, January 27th, we have Mars conjoining Pluto, right? This is not so great. Not particularly a big fan of Mars Pluto stuff, right? It does tend to correlate with more violence and aggressive things happening out in the world around us, right? Pluto is like this magnifying property, right? It explodes and expands everything that it touches to like the nth degree. And Mars being the product of violence and pain, trials, tribulations, right? All of these things. When it touches Pluto, we see an enormity of that in our day-to-day lives, right? It's like when you're in traffic and everyone just seems mad at each other and people are using their horns way more than normal. And then you pick up your phone and you look at the news and there's a travesty happening. It seems like everywhere you look, and then you go into work and someone's snappy with you and you're just on edge. And then you go home and you get in a fight with your spouse. And it's just like that constant kind of why can't I shake this feeling of conflict and tension? It's one of the harder ones. And so strap in, it's going to be not the best, but it can bring up power struggles that are necessary to look at, right? That underworld stuff, sometimes we need to see it so we can change something, so we can do something differently about it, so we can take action around it, so we can fight back against it, right? I think like a nice way to think of Mars Pluto is like fighting against the man TM, but still kind of a larger propensity for violence and conflict. So be careful, be intentional, be kind, be gentle with yourself and others. Another way to think about Mars Pluto stuff is it's deep work, right? Pluto's going to take you into the underground, and Mars is going to say, let's show up and do the thing. So there can be almost this call to really strap in and commit to the Aquarius part of your chart at this time and go laser focus with it and just kind of funnel in. I already know how I'm going to be spending a lot of this transit of Mars and Pluto being co-present with each other, and it is very much going very deep into the Aquarius ninth house of my chart to make something, right? And it's probably going to be hard and challenging, and also I'm excited about it. So it doesn't always need to be bad, but there can be this, let's say, this kind of probing inquiry. Excuse me. I get why people like to do forecasts with other people because when you just talk for like an hour straight, your voice starts getting a little hoarse. So yes, Mars, Pluto stuff, it can be this probing inquiry into your motivations, into your passions, into what lights you up, into what keeps you going, to what exhausts you, right? So really considering what you want to pour your energy and your effort into in the Aquarius part of your chart around this time, and perhaps kind of doing some deeper interrogation into those themes for yourself can be one way to quote unquote work with this transit instead of just having it kind of show up in the not so savory ways that we already talked about. All right. Final transit that we need to talk about, and thank goodness, because my voice feels like it's going to go very shortly, is January 29th. Mercury conjoins Venus. So we do end the month on a much sweeter note than we see with the Mars Pluto conjunction, right? Adorable. We love a Mercury Venus conjunction. It's a really nice way to close out the month. It's very sweet for writing, for communicating, for having some supportive conversations with other people, especially when it comes to kind of having a idealistic approach to something or envisioning a way that you can do it better, right? This is like a problem solving pair that has an ability to compromise, to have compassion, to approach the situation with a humanitarian kind of orientation. It does bring almost this aesthetic sensibility into the ways that we story tell, the ways that we educate and do business, which I think is really great. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there was kind of like an interesting marketing campaign that kind of catches everyone's eye around this time. But in your own life and in your own chart, think about where Aquarius is and starting to think about how you might have a little bit more of an appreciation for the ways that you're thinking about these topics at this time. And something it's like a creative spark gets lit that I think is going to feel really supportive. I think this is also a really good alignment, Mercury and Venus on the 29th, to have hard conversations, right? Because it indicates that other people are going to be more open and receptive. And this happens in the second decade of Aquarius, where Mercury has rulership in both decanic traditions. So Mercury is very, very at home there. And so it just kind of says like, all of those mercurial themes get a boost during this time, and they're also sweetened by Venus. It does happen to also be very good for divination. Like that second decan of Aquarius, I always say it's kind of like the astrologer decan, right? But it's really just divination as a whole. It's the ability to translate and transmit the messages of the cosmos, of the heavens, of the universe to someone down here on earth, to be a guide, to be a steward, to be a messenger, and to allow with Venus there, an ability to connect and relate and create around these themes. So, like devotional art would be such a good way to use this transit to get an astrology consultation, be a good way to lean in, right? It feels like it's safe and it's comfortable to go and explore these liminal spaces with that second decan of Aquarius and Venus being there. I feel like Venus is kind of asking, like, how do we make this nicer? How do we make this prettier? How do we make this more comfortable? How do we make this more supportive? And Mercury is kind of editing and tinkering and divining to find the answers. So it feels, like I said before, really good for problem solving some of the stuff that showed up during the Mars Pluto conjunction. So that is the astrology of January. I hope you guys enjoyed this forecast and that you learned a lot about what the month has in store. Be gentle with yourself. There's a lot of intense stuff happening this month, and it doesn't slow down. I'll be so honest with you. February, we get our first eclipses of the year. So we are headed right back into kind of a tumultuous time, let's say. I think eclipses are always a little bit chaotic, right? They're big changes and disruptions in the ways that we are approaching certain things. And I feel like because we are getting these eclipses starting in February, coming off the back of Venus, Mars, and Mercury cazimi in January, it's like we have so many realizations, we have so many epiphanies, so much clarity around where we want to go, that then those eclipses start really getting us moving and seeing some of those changes start to take place. So we're not slowing down, we're just speeding up. So strap in. This is 2026. We're here, we've arrived, we're doing it, and we'll be in it together. If you did enjoy, please make sure to like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe. If you are listening on Apple, please, please, please leave a review. It really, really helps out. Similarly on Spotify. And if you want to help support the production of the show, I would be so deeply appreciative of that. And you can do so by joining the Patreon page on my website, www.kirareiberg.com/exclusive content. There are tons of benefits for joining. I write new articles for my patrons all of the time. You get the best selection of every month. You get access to like six, I think, video lectures. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits for becoming a patron on top of the fact that you ensure that Threads of Fate is around for all of 2026 and into the future. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening and for checking it out. I appreciate you. I'm with you this month. We're in it together, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.